Good morning class, it's Mr. Knight again, and today I'm in the cathedral city of Lichfield. Today's RE lesson we're going to look at Christian buildings, the symbolism and the features inside them, and see how they bear on religion. Lichfield Cathedral is decorated by the heads of many kings. Around the corner from here there's also a figure of Charles II. Knowing this, do you think this is a Protestant cathedral or a Catholic cathedral? So now we're in the centre of the cathedral and we're in the nave. If you follow me, we're going to have a look around and look at different rooms and different artefacts within the cathedral here. As with many Christian places of worship, the building is laid out in a cross shape. You can also see Lichfield Cathedral with its roof on and its three spires, making it quite unique. Much of Christian faith is based on teachings from the Bible. Lichfield Cathedral has a collection of historical Bibles. This one here dates back to 1672, and you can see the illustration within the Bible here. All Christian buildings contain a lectern. The lectern can sometimes be made of wood and sometimes be made of brass like this one. The lectern has placed on it the Bible, which is where the teachers of God are taught from, so the rest of the communion. Christians not only read stories from the Bible, but they also rejoice and praise God through songs and prayer. Churches and cathedrals contain many religious artefacts. Central to all of them, though, would be the use of crucifixes, crosses, and chalices for drinking from. These are used in many of the ceremonies related to Christianity. In early Christian times, Christians used to be baptised into the faith in a river, like in this ceremony here with John the Baptist baptising Jesus. Nowadays, people will be baptised in the church using a font, and this is a font here within the cathedral. You may find simpler fonts in your church. The oldest remaining detail of the cathedral here is this painting behind me, which dates back probably to around about 1296. Around those sort of times, the cathedral would have been decorated with many paintings like this. Nowadays, the pictures and stories of the Bible are normally depicted in stained glass windows like this one here. You may recognise top left, George and the dragon, in the centre the crucifixion of Christ, and below that the story of Adam and Eve. This would be typical in many different religious buildings. Although it may be grander than most churches, every church and cathedral will have an altar like this one behind me, and from here the priest would conduct his teachings, his sermons and his ceremonies. You'll find an altar like this in any church. Although the main purpose of a church or cathedral is to worship God, many churches and cathedrals may also contain tombs or shrines. Behind me here is a shrine to St. Chad. He was a monk in Lichfield who died in 672. We also use candles a lot in the Christian faith. And the idea is you light a candle and you can say a prayer. This is the chapel of St. Chad, one of the oldest parts of Lichfield Cathedral, and this dates back to medieval times. As with many religious buildings, Lichfield Cathedral was built on a grand scale. These doors behind me may seem very, very large, but if I go stand next to them, you can see the real size of the doors. The doors you've just seen may seem very, very large, but we haven't always just let people in. In 1643, during the Civil War, the royalists occupied the cathedral here and used it as a barracks. So not just the soldiers were here, but horses and everything else containing within the war effort would be based within the cathedral here. When Prince Rupert soldiers were based within the cathedral here, and they weren't out fighting, they had to find their own way to occupy the time. Now this is a bit of a gruesome story, and I shouldn't really share this with you, but while the soldiers were here, they used to chase a cat around and around the cathedral day after day, and it's said that you could hear the echoes of the cat's meows all around, and that's how they passed their time. Lichfield Cathedral is decorated with many faces, and you can find them on most of the archways and pillars and doorways within the cathedral. Spaced to the left is how they would have appeared originally, but one to the right you can see the damage that would have been caused during the Civil War when the parliamentarians took over the cathedral. As well as the faces which were damaged during the Civil War, the main damage was the destruction of the main spire, which caused huge amounts of damage to the cathedral building itself. After the Civil War, Charles II commissioned restoration of the cathedral, and this stained glass window here shows the rebuilding of the spire. And finally, class, a little treat for you. This is the chapter house, and this is my favourite room within the cathedral. Have a quick look around before going back outside and talk to some more about the history of the cathedral. After the ravages of the Civil War, King Charles II, sculptured here, gave monies and timber for a restoration of the cathedral and mainly the spire. As a thank you, this sculpture was erected and has stood here at the cathedral in various different locations since the restoration was complete. So before we leave Lichfield, I have one more Civil War story for you. As the royalist soldiers of Lord Brooke were trying to capture the cathedral, Lord Brooke had his cannons mounted in Dam Street, where we'll have a look in a second. As he was inspecting his cannons one morning, he lifted the visor on his helmet, and Dumb Diet, an illiterate man, pulled the trigger of his musket from the cathedral spire. The musket ball flew all the way down the street, going through Lord Brooke's forehead. I'll show you where it happened. Right on this very spot. So from that spire up there, wow, what a shot. Hello class, I hope you're still with me. After a quick costume change and 30 miles down the road from Lichfield, I'm now in Coventry in another cathedral. Like Lichfield Cathedral, this was also damaged by war, but unlike Lichfield Cathedral, this has not been restored. This pillar alongside me would have held up the roof. As you see, there is no longer a roof on this cathedral. All the damage to the cathedral and that you can see behind me occurred in 1940 during the Second World War, when the German Luftwaffe flew over, destroying almost the whole of Coventry. The cathedral here was ablaze, and what you see behind me is what remains. Though this cathedral may now be in ruins, it's still very much a Christian building, and as you see to the left here, we still have a figure of Christ. And to the right of me, there's still a cross. Now this cross is made of some form of timber. Why do you think they may have used this timber in this location? This memorial here was actually part of the original cathedral and was laid here in 1922. So this would have been present when the cathedral was bombed on the 14th of November 1940. This looks remarkably well preserved, and that's because in 1951 this was lovingly restored and placed back in the place where it came from, unlike the rest of the cathedral, which has been left in the state that it was. Though Coventry Cathedral is still a religious building, its main purpose now is a building of remembrance for all people who have lost their lives in conflict. This statue here signifies this deeply. This memorial here to my left signifies what Coventry Cathedral now represents. The whole cathedral here memorial represents love, apathy and loss and remembrance, and that's what Coventry Cathedral here is remembered for and celebrated for. But behind me, a new cathedral was built in 1962, and I think it'd be interesting to go and have a look and compare the three cathedrals with Lichfield as well. So behind me is the new cathedral, which was built in 1962. You may notice it's very, very different to Coventry Cathedral that we've just looked at and Lichfield Cathedral. Everything around this cathedral may look a little strange in comparison. Although extremely modern in comparison, this cathedral is still a Christian building. It still contains a lot of Christian symbolism. If you look over my shoulder here, you will still see the cross is heavily represented in this building. And if you look over my shoulder here, there's still morals like good over bad. Looking at the new Coventry Cathedral behind me, you may notice it's made of completely different materials and in a completely different style to Lichfield and the old cathedral that we've just seen. Why do you think these materials were used? And if you were designing it, how would you have designed it differently? Finally class, we've come to Worcester and have had another costume change. We're going to have a quick look inside Worcester Cathedral and see why this cathedral was restored, but a bit different to Lichfield where it was damaged due to war. Worcester just fell into disrepair and was needing a restoration. Let's go and have a look inside. Worcester had many churches, but in 1084 when Wolston became bishop, he demolished all the churches in this vicinity and started building this cathedral. This wall here behind me dates back to the first crypt and the start of the building of Worcester Cathedral. By 1224, the then bishop decided to extend the church for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the number of pilgrims coming to Worcester Cathedral had grown in numbers, and secondly, there were a lot of monks living at the cathedral at this point. By 1250, the cathedral extensions were finished, and it would have looked more like this cathedral we see here behind me. Although there are several medieval relics around the cathedral still, from the years 1290 onwards, the cathedral slowly started falling into a state of disrepair. This medieval figure here still remains though. By the mid-19th century, a lot of the cathedral was showing a lot of signs of wear and tear, just like this tomb behind me here. But by 1856, the Great Victorian Restoration had begun, and the cathedral was due a nice look of paint. Many high-ranked Victorian figures were quite key to raising the money and donating their own personal wealth to the restoration of the cathedral here, one of which was the Earl of Dudley, and this was erected to say thank you. The restoration was a complete ground-upwards restoration. Nearly the whole cathedral was restored and replenished in different areas. That's why today the cathedral looks in this style, rather than the style that we saw earlier with a white cathedral.